This isn't your home anymore, Dad. Sarah's voice was colder than the snowstorm outside the window. The room went silent. Only the faint clink of silverware on porcelain broke the air, like something sacred had just cracked. On the table, the turkey was still steaming, the Christmas lights still flickered, but inside my chest, everything went dark. I looked at my daughter, the same little girl who used to bury her face in my arms when the thunder rolled, and now she stared at me like I was a stranger. Mark, her husband, sat beside her, smirking as he set down his wineglass. "You should understand," he said quietly. "It's time you moved somewhere, more suitable." I gripped my knife so tight my palm bled without me even noticing. More suitable? He meant a nursing home. He meant leaving the house I built with my own hands, every beam soaked in sweat and memories. No one spoke after that. Sarah lowered her eyes, refusing to meet mine. Only the candlelight flickered in my tear-filled gaze, then slowly went out. That Christmas Eve, snow blanketed the porch, and that same night, I learned, some wounds don't come from strangers, they come from the ones you love most. Follow my story, because what happened after that dinner was darker than betrayal itself. My name is George Miller, 65 years old. I used to believe that if a man lived with kindness, loved deeply enough, his children would understand. But life doesn't follow that kind of formula. I was born and raised in the suburbs of Cincinnati, in a small wooden house I built myself when Sarah was just 3. It smelled of pine resin and echoed with the comforting creak of old stairs. I was a carpenter. My wife, Helen, was an elementary school teacher. We didn't have much, but our home was always filled with laughter. When cancer took Helen, Sarah was only 17 tall. I remember that night clearly. She buried her face on my shoulder and whispered through her tears, "It's just you and me now, Dad. I'll take care of you for the rest of my life." I believed her. Foolishly. Completely. After Helen passed, I threw myself into work. Fixing tables, building cabinets, painting doors, anything to save enough for Sarah's college tuition. The day she graduated, I cried. Not out of pride, but because I thought I could finally rest. Because I believed I wouldn't have to walk the rest of this life alone. Sarah used to be gentle, always smiling. Every morning she brought me a cup of hot tea. Every Christmas, the two of us decorated the tree together, with tiny wooden ornaments I carved by hand, a star, a reindeer, and a little heart engraved with the words, "For my little girl." Then she met Mark, a charming man, smooth voice, confident smile. The first time I looked into his eyes, something deep inside me stirred, a quiet warning. But Sarah said, "Dad, he understands me. He'll take care of you just like I do." I smiled and nodded. I wanted to believe her, because my little girl deserved happiness. What I didn't know was that from the day of that wedding, the light inside our wooden house began to fade. The first year after the wedding, Sarah and Mark moved in with me. I thought it would be warm and lively. 3 people, 1 home, sharing meals and laughter. But that laughter never came back. Mark brought with him expensive gadgets, late-night business calls, and a watchful glare every time I walked through the living room. "Dad, could you please not leave your tools all over the place?" Sarah said, her voice gentle but cold. I smiled, picked up the wooden scraps, and tucked them into the box. "Sorry, sweetheart. I was just fixing the chair." Mark looked up, smirked, and muttered, "Old people tend to forget where their boundaries are." I stayed silent, but inside, something cracked. Dinner times grew shorter. Sarah spoke less, and Mark spoke for her. Every time I mentioned Helen, Sarah turned away. Sometimes late at night I could hear them arguing behind closed doors. "We need to sell that house, you understand. Stop getting sentimental." That house, my house, the one where Sarah grew up, the one where my wife's ashes still rested in the attic. One evening I found Sarah standing on the porch, staring at the old pine tree we used to decorate every Christmas. "You miss your mom?" I asked. She nodded faintly, lips trembling. If Mom were still here, maybe things would be different. I reached out to touch her shoulder, but she stepped back. Tears streamed down her face. "Dad, I'm just so tired." I don't know what Mark had said to her, what poison he'd planted in her mind. All I knew was that from that day on, Sarah stopped making me tea in the mornings. Breakfast became a table set for 2, and I wasn't one of them. That Christmas, the old tree still stood in the yard, but the lights had burned out long ago, and for the first time in my life, I felt like a stranger in my own home. That morning, Mark made himself black coffee and leaned against the kitchen counter like he owned the place. His voice was smooth, the kind of smooth that hides something. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime chance," he told Sarah. "The Riverside Loft project needs funding before the 31st. If we miss it, we're out." The word we stuck in my ear like a splinter. Sarah said nothing, her fingers twisting nervously. "How much funding?" I asked. Mark turned to me with that polite, fake smile of his. "About 220,000 for the first phase. We could use the equity from this house. Great interest rate." This house. I knew exactly what he meant. Mortgage it or sell it. "You're getting older," Mark went on, still smiling. "Maple Oaks Senior Home has great care, private rooms, all-inclusive services. And only $2,900 a month." Sarah's eyes dropped to the floor. "Dad, maybe it's time you had professional care." I didn't want to explode. Instead, I took out an old wooden box and opened it. Inside were decades of receipts. Pine lumber from 1993, paint invoices, sketches drawn by my own hand, roof repairs after the 2008 storm. I laid each paper on the table, one by one, like pieces of my life. "This house," I said quietly, "every beam in it was built with my sweat, and it holds Sarah's childhood." Mark chuckled softly. "You're misunderstanding, George. We're talking about the future." He placed a glossy blue folder on the table. Thompson Investments stamped across the cover. Flowcharts, profit projections, bright renderings of modern condos. He slid a pen toward me. "Just a few signatures. Here and here. Authorization to represent, plus a temporary residence agreement. Purely formalities." The pen glided across the page like a blade. Sarah looked at me, her eyes clouded with something between fear and hope. "Dad, if the project works out, Mark and I will pay you back, I promise." That word, promise, hit like thunder. It took me back to a rainy night years ago when a 9-year-old Sarah clutched my hand and whispered, "I promise I'll always stay with you." I pushed the papers back. "I need time." The next day, Mark changed tactics. He brought a color-printed Excel sheet, healthcare costs, insurance, home repairs. "See this? The stairs are steep, no safety rails in the bathroom. One slip, and..." He stopped, smirking. "I'm not trying to jinx anything. Maple Oaks even has woodcraft classes. Right up your alley." He stressed woodcraft like it was charity. That night, I heard them whispering in their room. "Don't get soft, Sarah," Mark said firmly. "You're the sole heir. You have to protect your assets." "I'll handle the paperwork." Tuesday morning, a man in a gray suit showed up. Victor Hale, Mark's legal advisor. He laid down a quitclaim deed. "Just a name adjustment for easier financing," he said with a candy-sweet grin. "You'll still have residency rights, of course." I checked the addendum. It was blank. That evening, Lucy, my silver-haired neighbor, brought over a loaf of garlic bread. Her eyes fell on the documents. "Be careful, George," she warned. "I overheard Mark on the phone. Sounds like he's in deep financial trouble." My chest tightened. Later in the garage, I dug through the trash, old habits from my workshop days. Under layers of wrapping paper, I found a credit card notice under Mark's name. $12,480 overdue, 45 days late. I took a photo. Proof. Thursday, I visited Maple Oaks alone. The hallways smelled like disinfectant. The lights were bright, almost too white. The receptionist smiled, rehearsed, and flawless. "We offer both standard and premium rooms. Visits are scheduled twice a week, 45 minutes each." "Scheduled?" I asked. "Yes, sir. Family visits must be pre-approved." I nodded. But inside, something went cold, like a small fire going out. I pictured myself sitting there watching the clock, waiting for my daughter to be allowed to visit me. When I got home, Mark was waiting. "You went out without telling us?" he asked, voice friendly but eyes sharp. "I went to Maple Oaks," I said. He clapped his hands once. "Perfect. Then just sign the papers. My brother knows a notary. Tomorrow at 10. "I'll have my lawyer look at it first," I said. His smile faltered for half a second. "What lawyer?" "David and Gwen," I said. "The kid from the old workshop. He's with Horizon Legal now." That night, I heard the argument begin again. You really want to live surrounded by rotting wood and ghosts of the past? Mark's voice snapped. That's my father's house, Sarah whispered. It's our asset, he shot back. And don't forget, he's been forgetting things lately. Left the fireplace on all night, remember? I clenched my fists in the dark. I remembered perfectly. I turned the fireplace off myself, even wrote off 9:20 p.m. on the calendar. The next morning the calendar was gone. Instead, Mark showed Sarah a kitchen camera clip. Edited, fast-forwarded, conveniently cut to black. See? He forgot, Mark said. Sarah's hands trembled. Dad? Maybe we can just do this temporarily? I pulled out my phone and showed her the photo of Mark's overdue bill. He flinched, then quickly laughed. Fake. You think I'd leave that lying around? I didn't answer. I just felt the family rope tightening, every knot being quietly undone. When Mark left the room, I turned to Sarah. There's something you need to see. I opened the secret drawer under the stairs and took out an old brown folder, Helen's handwritten will, dated 2007. In her delicate script, she wrote that the house was a spiritual heirloom, not to be sold or mortgaged, and that any transfer required mutual consent, mine and Sarah's. Sarah traced her fingers over her mother's handwriting. Her lips trembled. Then outside, Mark's car engine roared, one sharp honk, cold and piercing. I closed the folder. And in that moment, a decision took shape, clear and solid as the sound of a hammer striking wood. I would not sign, and I would not stay silent any longer. 3 days later, Mark changed tactics. He stopped persuading and started cornering, with forged documents and honey-coated lies. That morning, Sarah spoke while clearing the breakfast table. Dad, I called the insurance company yesterday. They said you haven't paid your health premiums for 3 months. I frowned. They're paid automatically through my bank card. She laid an invoice in front of me, my supposed signature scribbled at the bottom, next to the words payment declined. But I knew that handwriting wasn't mine. That afternoon, Mark brought home a psychologist. Just a routine checkup, he said, smiling. The doctor asked harmless questions. Do you often forget things, Mr. Miller? Do you remember what day it is today? December 17th, I answered clearly. Friday. She nodded, jotting notes. Then Mark chimed in. Funny, last week he said it was 2024. I turned toward him, but Sarah kept her eyes down. I understood then. Mark wasn't testing my memory. He was building a medical record, a legal excuse to strip me of my rights. That night I sat in my old basement workshop, carving a small wooden box. The smell of pine still lingered like a ghost of better years. My hands trembled. Above me, I heard Sarah's footsteps. Dad, Mark just wants what's best for you, she said softly. I looked up. And what about you, Sarah? Do you believe I'm losing my mind? She said nothing. Her eyes shimmered. I'm just scared, she whispered. Scared one day you'll fall and no one will be there. What you should be scared of, I said quietly, is the day you stop recognizing yourself. The next morning, a letter arrived from the bank, confirmation that a mortgage application was in process for 143 Maple Street. I called them immediately. It says Mrs. Sarah Miller submitted a co-ownership file with your signature, the agent told me. That's impossible, I said. Send me the contract copy. 10 minutes later, the email arrived. My heart sank. My signature, forged again. I rushed to Lucy's house next door. Her wrinkled hands trembled as she spoke. George, I heard that Mark bragging at the grocery store. Said the house deal's almost done. He laughed, said, the old man can't even remember what he ate yesterday. I recorded her words and sent the file to David, the young lawyer who once worked in my wood shop. He replied almost instantly, Don't sign anything else, Mr. Miller. Send me every document. This could be fraudulent transfer. We can fight it. That evening, Mark came home with a bottle of red wine. Tonight we celebrate, he said, pouring the glasses. I stared at the deep crimson in my cup, the color of something bleeding. Celebrate what? The project got approved, he grinned. You should be proud. Your house helped your daughter move up in the world. He emphasized helped like it was charity. I set the glass down. Mark, I said slowly, let's be clear. This house doesn't belong to me, or to my daughter. It belongs to a family, and you have never understood what that means. His smile vanished. Are you insulting me, old man? No. I'm telling the truth. Sarah stood nearby, shaking, eyes red from tears. Dad, that's enough, she whispered. I'm tired. Tired because you loved the wrong man, or because I told you the truth. She turned away and walked upstairs. Mark stepped closer, leaned in, his voice a cold whisper. If it's a war you want, I'm ready. Just remember, they believe you're the one losing your mind, not me. I said nothing. His footsteps echoed down the hall, sharp, hollow, final, and I knew the battle had begun. I sat down at my desk and opened my wooden ledger, every page marked with dates, bills, and receipts. I photographed them all and sent them to David. His reply came a minute later, short, firm, resolute. Don't worry, Mr. Miller. I won't let them take what Helen left behind. That night I didn't sleep. Outside, the snow fell thick and silent. Upstairs, I heard Sarah crying softly. And in the basement, I began writing everything down. Every word, every act, every lie. Because I finally understood, without proof, truth can be buried. Buried under the warm, deceiving name of family. The next morning, Mark was a different man. Gone was the polished businessman with the charming smile. He barked at people over the phone, slammed his fist on the table, and threw the newspaper across the counter. On the business page, a small headline read, Thompson Investments facing liquidity risk. Sarah's eyes widened. Mark, what's happening? Don't ask, he snapped, then turned to me. Lies, just rumors. I looked at him calmly. If they're lies, why not sue them? He gave a sharp, bitter laugh. You wouldn't understand finance. Stay out of it, old man. That afternoon, I saw him lock himself in his office and make a call. His voice was low but clear enough through the door. Yeah, I'll recollateralize another asset. No, the title's in Sarah's name. You know that. If needed, I'll fake the old man's signature again. My heart pounded. He'd just admitted it. Forgery. I pulled out my phone, hit record, but only caught a few seconds before he opened the door and saw me standing there. Eavesdropping? He asked, his voice ablade. Just passing by. He stepped closer, whispered, You'd better remember this. You have no rights here anymore. Once the paperwork's done, the house belongs to Sarah, and that means I'm the legal head of household. You're just a guest. That night, Sarah stood in the kitchen washing dishes, hands trembling, eyes red. Do you know what he's doing, Sarah? I asked softly. She bit her lip. Mark says everything he does is for our future. What kind of future is built on lies? You don't understand, she cried. He's under so much pressure. If the project fails, he loses everything. I placed a hand on her shoulder. And you think losing this house, your mother's memories, is worth it? Sarah looked at me, torn between two worlds, love on one side and the truth she was too afraid to face on the other. The next day, David came to see me. He brought a folder, printed evidence of Mark's forged signatures, and a loan contract under Sarah's name. He used the house as collateral for a $350,000 loan from a private finance company, David said grimly. If he defaults, the house gets seized. I froze. Sarah doesn't know? No. He hid it from her. He signed everything himself, but since the house is co-owned, they'll take both shares if it collapses. That night, I called Sarah downstairs. I laid the papers out on the table, one by one. She dropped into the chair, face pale. No, that can't be true. Look closely, I said, my voice trembling. This is why he wanted the house, not for an investment, to pay his debts. Sarah shook her head, tears falling. He wouldn't. He loves me. I slammed my hand on the table. Love doesn't lie. Love doesn't steal the home your mother built with her tears. The crash of the front door cut through the air. Mark stormed in, face flushed red. What's going on here? Showing her the truth, I said. He snatched the papers from Sarah's hands, crumpled them, and threw them in the trash. Pathetic scare tactics. Remember, I've got witnesses. And video, proving you're mentally unstable. Sarah stepped back, frightened. I stood, meeting his eyes. If you hurt my daughter, I swear I'll drag you into court myself. He smirked. Court? You think anyone will believe a senile old man over a successful businessman? Then he grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her toward the door. All I heard was the slam, heavy, final, like the sound of a coffin closing. That night, I sat alone in the basement, the snow tapping gently against the windows. In my hands, the loan documents David had given me and the short recording where Mark admitted forging my signature. I knew what was coming. The confrontation was inevitable, but the real pain wasn't that an outsider was stealing my home. It was knowing that the hand holding the knife belonged to my own daughter. I can't remember the exact date, only that it was the heaviest snowfall of that winter. Everything outside was white, silent, as if the world itself was holding its breath. That afternoon, I'd just finished fixing a small cabinet in the garage when the doorbell rang. Sharp, urgent. At the door stood two officials from the Hamilton County Housing Office. One held a clipboard, the other a badge. "Mr. George Miller?" "Yes." "We're here to verify your relocation notice. According to our records, this property now belongs to Sarah and Mark Thompson. You have 14 days to vacate." I froze. 14 days. 14 days to leave the house I built with my own hands. "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice trembling. The man glanced at the papers. "We have a notarized transfer agreement here, with your signature." I looked down. The signature, my name, forged in cruel perfection. The ink itself felt colder than the snow outside. Sarah stepped out from behind them, eyes red and swollen. "Dad, please, let me explain," Mark cut in sharply. "There's nothing to explain. It's all legal procedure." He said it like he was evicting a stranger, not his wife's father. I looked at Sarah, searching her face for defiance, regret, anything, but all I found was silence. That night, I packed my things. Every object I touched, Helen's old mug, our wedding photo, the little wooden reindeer I carved when Sarah was 8. Each one felt like a wound reopening. Sarah stood by the door, arms crossed as if holding herself together. "I'm sorry, Dad." "Mark promised it's only temporary, just until we sort out the finances. Then, I'll bring you home." I gave her a faint smile. "Sarah, when a child has to say temporary to her own father, maybe she's already gone too far." I left just before dawn. Snow blanketed the roof I'd once nailed shingle by shingle. When I turned for one last look, the porch light glowed softly, and through the window I saw Mark's arm around my daughter. In that moment, I understood. I no longer had a home. I rented a small room above Lucy's bakery. That old woman cared for me like family. "George," she said, "you can't let this stand. I've seen what he's doing, using that poor girl to rob you blind." I sighed. "I don't want to sue my own daughter, Lucy." She gripped my hand tightly. "You're not suing Sarah. You're saving her. If you don't fight back, Mark will destroy you both." That night, I opened my old laptop and called David on video. "You're facing constructive eviction," he said firmly. "Oh, they forged your signature to transfer ownership. You still have Helen's handwritten will?" "I've kept it safe," I said. "Good. I'll need the original, and the audio recording of Mark admitting the forgery. That'll be our first strike." We made a plan. David would file an emergency injunction with the Hamilton Civil Court to freeze the property and launch a formal investigation into the forgery. And I would go back to that house, not with a key, but with the truth. The next morning I stood across the street from my home. The Christmas flag still fluttered gently in the wind, but the door now bore a new lock. Through the window I saw Mark pull the curtain closed, his eyes darting nervously. I took out my phone and recorded everything: the nameplate, the notice taped to the door, the license plate of his car. Every small detail was evidence. As I walked back through the snow, the flakes melted into cold water on my hair and face. But inside me, for the first time in months, something was burning again. I was no longer the frail old man thrown out of his home. I was the man who built that house, beam by beam, brick by brick, and I was going to take it back. Not just for myself, but to wake my daughter from the blindness that man had wrapped her in. Because this time, I wasn't fighting for a house, I was fighting for family. 2 weeks later, on Easter Sunday, the service was held at St. Matthew's Church, the same church my family had attended for years. I sat in the very last pew, among the quiet elders whispering their prayers. The smell of candle wax and the solemn chords of the organ filled the air. It all reminded me of Helen, how she used to hold my hand every Easter morning. Now that seat beside me was painfully empty. Up front, Sarah and Mark sat in the first row, beside the head priest and a few relatives. Mark wore a gray suit, a white rose pinned to his chest, that perfect smile plastered on his face. Sarah was in a pale blue dress, tired eyes behind a calm mask. I knew she was doing everything she could to appear like the dutiful daughter, the devoted wife, even as everything behind the curtain was rotting away. The priest finished his prayer and invited the congregation to share testimonies. Mark rose from his seat, took the microphone, and began. "I want to thank God for giving my wife and me a new beginning," he said, his tone dripping with confidence. "We've overcome hardships to build a new home, a place where love and faith live together." New home. Each word struck like a knife. Our new home. He called it ours. I gripped the Bible in my hands, the thin pages crumpling under my fingers. Across the aisle, Lucy caught my eye. She gave me a subtle nod. The signal. It was time. As Mark stepped down, the priest turned to invite the next speaker. I stood up. Every head in the church turned. Some recognized me, the old man who once came here with his wife and little girl. I walked slowly toward the pulpit. My voice was raspy but clear. "Excuse me, Father. Forgive me, everyone. I have something to share. About the new home Mr. Thompson just spoke of." The air tightened. Sarah's face drained of color. Mark frowned. "George, this isn't the time." "Oh, it's exactly the time," I interrupted. "I used to think God tested me with loneliness, but now I realize he was testing me with betrayal." I reached inside my coat and pulled out a brown envelope. Helen's handwritten will, copies of the forged loan documents, and the recording of Mark's confession. I held them high for all to see. "These are the proofs," I said, voice shaking but firm. "Proof that this house was never transferred legally. It belongs to my family, to my late wife, to my deceived daughter, and to me. And the man sitting right here," I turned to Mark, "forged my signature, took loans under false pretenses, and used family as a shield for his crimes." Gasps rippled through the pews. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, he really did that?" Mark forced a smirk. "Do you have any proof, or is this another fantasy from a senile old man?" I took out my phone and hit play. From the speaker came Mark's unmistakable voice. "If needed, I'll fake the old man's signature again." The church fell silent. Then came the murmurs. Judgmental, disbelieving, relentless. Sarah stood abruptly. "Mark, what did you say?" He forced a laugh. "Sweetheart, that was—" "What, Mark?" I cut in. "A joke? Or part of the plan you've been weaving all along?" People turned toward him. He looked around, trapped, then grabbed Sarah's wrist. "Sit down," he hissed under his breath. But the microphone was still on. His voice echoed through the church, sharp and ugly. The whispers turned to stares. I stepped closer, my voice trembling but full. "I don't want the house back for money. I just want my daughter to see the truth before she loses everything, even her soul." The priest rose, trying to calm the storm. "Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Thompson, perhaps you should speak with him privately." But Mark pulled Sarah toward the aisle, refusing to look back. Every gaze in the church followed them, silent, heavy, condemning. I stood there in the stillness of the sanctuary, the echo of their footsteps fading away, and I knew the quiet war was over. The public battle had begun. News spreads faster than wind. Just hours after the Easter service, the entire St. Matthew's community was whispering about the father betrayed by his son-in-law. Lucy called me that afternoon. "George, I went to the supermarket this morning. Everyone's talking about it. They said you were brave, standing up in church like that. Some folks are even planning to file a petition to investigate Mark." I stayed silent, tightening my grip around a cold cup of coffee. I didn't feel proud, just empty. I never wanted to expose my own daughter in public. But Mark had pushed me so far, there was no other choice left. Later that day, as I stepped out of Lucy's bakery, a black sedan screeched to a halt in front of me. Mark got out, suit crisp, face hard as steel. "You proud of yourself?" he hissed. "Making a spectacle of me in church? Turning me into the town's punchline?" I met his glare. I just told the truth. "You'll regret this," he said, voice low and dangerous. "You think a few edited recordings scare me? I'll sue you for defamation." He moved closer. I could smell the mix of expensive cologne and stale cigarettes, thick and artificial. "I'm not afraid," I told him. "Because the truth doesn't need to be afraid. Mark smirked, opened his car door, and tossed an envelope at my feet. You want money, old man? Here, 5 grand. Call it hush money. Sign this paper and disappear from our lives. I bent down, picked it up, looked at him for a long moment, then tore it in half right there. I don't sell my soul that cheap, Mark, and I sure as hell don't sell Helen's memories. He froze, eyes narrowing. You'll regret saying that, he muttered before slamming the door. The tires spun, spraying mud across my shoes. I didn't move. I'd been humiliated enough times before, but this time I felt only resolve. The next evening, Lucy came by again, this time with a stranger. George, this is Tommy, a reporter from the Hamilton Voice. He wants to hear your story. Tommy was young, sharp-eyed, but carried the quiet gravity of someone who'd seen too much. We've heard from people around town, he said. If you have evidence, we can help you tell your story, not just to get justice, but to warn others who've been betrayed by their own family. I sat down, opened my old wooden box, and laid everything on the table: Helen's handwritten will, the invoices, the photo of Mark's overdue credit notice, the original recording of his confession. Tommy took notes carefully, his expression darkening with every page. Finally, he said softly, You know, George, you remind me of my father. His son-in-law stole his land. He stayed silent until the day he died. But you're fighting back. I looked at him and spoke slowly. I'm not fighting to win, son. I'm fighting so Sarah can finally see. 3 days later, the article went live. Bold headlines splashed across the local site. Betrayed by blood, the father, a businessman, son-in-law, tried to rob of his home. It spread like wildfire across the town's social feeds. Hundreds of comments poured in. Disgusting greed. How could a daughter let that happen? Investigate him immediately. That night, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Dozens of calls, messages, offers to help. Neighbors dropped off groceries. A retired attorney even volunteered to assist David. For the first time in months, I felt something stir inside me. Not revenge, but hope. A fragile, flickering belief that justice could still find its way back, even if it limped. Mark, on the other hand, exploded. His lawyer sent a cease and desist letter demanding I remove defamatory content. But it was too late. The truth was out. The evidence was in the public's hands. And for the first time, Mark wasn't the one controlling the story. That night, I stood by the small window of my rented room, watching the city lights shimmer across the snow. I whispered to myself, Thank you, Lord. I'm not alone anymore. I woke to the phone ringing nonstop. Lucy's voice was breathless on the other end. George, but have you seen the news? Mark's fighting back. I turned on the TV. Mark's face filled the morning broadcast, polished as ever, playing the part of the wronged man. These accusations are very unfortunate, he told the reporter, voice steady. My father-in-law is dealing with mental health issues. My wife and I only want what's best for him, and yet it seems he's being misunderstood. I hope the community won't be swayed by misinformation. The segment cut to edited footage. Me alone in church, my face taut with strain. The sort of montage that makes a nervous man look unhinged. They flashed a medical report, claiming I showed signs of age-related memory decline. I sat frozen, anger shaking my hands. Lie, I whispered. Lucy slammed her palm on the counter. He's gone too far, George. You have to hit back. If you stay quiet, people will believe him. I called David immediately. I've seen it, he said. But he's already tripping over his own lies. That medical report is fabricated. He doctored a routine exam and slapped a different hospital header on it. Send me your original. I'll get the truth to the press. 3 hours later, the Hamilton Voice published a follow-up. Bold, relentless. Forged documents. Mark Thompson accused of fabricating medical records to mislead public. The piece included side-by-side comparisons. The genuine report I'd kept, and the altered version Mark fed the cameras. Tommy annotated differences, pointing out mismatched letterheads and altered timestamps. Social media erupted again. What a fraud. George was telling the truth. Sarah, wake up! By mid-afternoon, I got a call from a trembling woman. Mr. Miller, I'm Nancy. I used to work in Mark's accounting office. I have documents you need to see. We met at a small diner. Nancy slid a USB across the table. I can't stand by while he lies, she said. This has the original loan contract and transaction records. He owes more than $380,000. He used your house as collateral. If his company collapses, the bank will seize the property. Holding that little drive felt like clutching a live coal. I handed it to David without hesitation. An hour later, his voice over the phone trembled with something close to triumph. George, this is gold. This proves fraudulent lending and concealed indebtedness. I'll file it with the court and the district attorney. With the forged signatures and now this, it's no longer a civil fight. It's criminal. That night, Mark appeared on the air again, attempting to look composed. He opened his mouth to threaten a defamation suit. Then the broadcast cut into a breaking alert. Hamilton County Police confirmed they are investigating Mark Thompson for alleged forgery and financial fraud. On the screen, Mark stood motionless, his expression collapsing into stunned silence. I didn't feel victory so much as a deep, aching sorrow. The fight for truth was underway, but the person who hurt the most remained my daughter. Later that evening, my phone glowed with an unfamiliar number. A text from Sarah. Dad, I don't know who to trust, but I want to see you, alone. My chest tightened. Maybe after the first storm of revelations, she'd begun to glimpse the light. I closed my eyes and whispered into the dark, Lord, if this is the beginning of justice, grant me strength to see it through. Outside, the snow fell quietly. Inside, the first sparks of the counterattack had been struck. The war for our house, and for my daughter's soul, had moved from whispers to evidence to action, and for the first time in months, I felt the tide start to turn. That morning, I walked into the Horizon legal office with David. The conference room was small but bright, the smell of coffee mingling with the rhythmic tapping of keyboards. The young man who once sanded wood beside me now sat in a suit, serious and composed behind a stack of legal files. Mr. Miller, David said, today we're filing the official lawsuit. This isn't just a civil dispute anymore. It's a case of fraud, forgery, and elder exploitation. He slid the document across the table. I read each line slowly. Plaintiff, George Miller. Defendants, Mark Thompson, Sarah Miller, Thompson. Charges, fraudulent conveyance, forgery, and elder exploitation. Seeing my daughter's name printed under defendant pierced deeper than any blade. David, I murmured. Sarah, she's not a bad person. She's just lost her way. He nodded gently. I know. That's why I've noted in the filing that the complaint is directed solely at Mark. Sarah's listed only as a party affected, not accused. I nodded, hand trembling as I signed the final page. Every stroke of the pen felt like carving a wound into my own heart. But I knew there was no other road left to take. 3 days later, the Hamilton County Court accepted the case. At David's request, the judge issued an immediate freeze on Thompson Investments' business accounts and all transactions linked to the $380,000 loan. News spread quickly, and Mark began to look like a cornered animal. That evening, he called me. His voice was no longer confident. It was cracked, raw, and furious. You think you've won? You just cost dozens of people their jobs. You've destroyed me. No, I said quietly. You destroyed yourself the moment you started lying. He snarled. I'll countersue. I'll drain you with legal fees until you're broke. Mark, I said slowly, you once stood before God and vowed to protect my daughter. Now all you do is threaten an old man. Tell me, does that still feel human to you? He paused, breath heavy, then hung up. But I knew. Fear had finally found its way into his voice. 2 days later, David and I returned to the courthouse to file additional evidence, a copy of Mark's internal company emails. In one, he had written to his accountant, "Keep it off the books. We'll fix the papers later." David tapped the line with his pen. "That's concealment of income, Mr. Miller. If this goes federal, he's looking at tax evasion charges." I looked at him, this young man who once learned from me how to smooth rough timber, and now he was the one sanding away the rough edges of injustice. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Quiet pride. By late afternoon, new reports came in. Midwest Capital Bank had frozen Mark's accounts pending investigation. On the evening financial broadcast, the anchor announced, "Businessman Mark Thompson faces allegations of forged collateral documents. Thompson Investments stock value dropped 40% in 2 days." I watched the news, not with joy, not with hatred, just with the calm understanding that every lie carries a price. That night, Sarah came to see me. She wore a gray coat, her hair unkempt, eyes hollow from sleepless nights. "Dad," she whispered, He says you're trying to destroy him. You're making us criminals in front of the whole world. Sarah, I said, looking straight into her eyes, I only want the truth to be seen. If you choose to believe him over justice itself, then there's nothing I can do to save you. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't know who to believe anymore. I touched her shoulder gently. Then let the court speak for me. She stood silent for a long moment before turning away, her perfume lingering faintly in the empty room. When the door closed, I sat down and opened my notebook, writing a single line. April 22nd. The house remains locked, but the door to justice has begun to open. A week after the lawsuit was filed, Mark struck back. The papers ran the headline, Businessman Mark Thompson retains heavyweight attorney Robert Klein, 12 major financial victories in Ohio. Photos showed Mark and Klein shaking hands, confidence like armor. David frowned as he read. Klein's the old pro, he said. He twists procedure to seed doubt. He'll go after your mind, Mr. Miller, your memory, your state of health. That's his angle. I let out a small laugh. Let him try. I've lived 65 years. I know what's true. The very next day, Mark made his opening play. He filed what he claimed was a binding transfer agreement bearing my signature and fingerprints. Klein stood before the cameras and said with a measured tone, My client executed a lawful transaction. Mr. Miller, given his age, may have signed and forgotten. Reporters' questions shifted. Headlines softened. Family dispute. Could this be a misunderstanding? A cold shiver ran down my spine. David, how would they get my fingerprints? I asked. He was thoughtful, then remembered. When you approved invoices during that porch repair, Mark asked you to initial receipts. He could have kept copies. With skillful editing, they can lift prints and splice them. They're being careful. David's jaw tightened. We'll counter that. He sent the disputed documents to Columbus Forensic Lab, an independent fingerprint and document analysis team. 2 days later, their report came back with the kind of language lawyers hunger for. The fingerprint evidence shows signs of composite assembly and digital blurring. The impressions do not form a complete, continuous match to the subject sample. That sentence was a crack in the dam. David filed a formal rebuttal motion. The defense's so-called transfer documents showed digital manipulation and should be stricken from evidence pending a full forensic audit. Mark sputtered rage into television cameras, calling me a liar and a saboteur. His confident public posture was a mask now stretched thin. When the court released the forensic results, cracks widened. News anchors reported soberly that the defendant's exhibit failed authentication tests. Investors reacted fast. Thompson Investments hemorrhaged capital, shares dropping another 25%. The company's public face, once polished, now showed bruises. Mark's bravado gave way to a new expression, thin, taut anxiety. Then an anonymous call changed everything again. A voice, rough and cautious, said, George Miller, I used to work at Thompson Investments. I can send records showing Mark moved money to offshore accounts in the Caymans. We met the whistleblower's evidence halfway. He handed a USB with transaction logs and wire transfers. The files suggested more than corporate slippage. They suggested hiding money beyond reach. When David saw the data, he nearly stood up from his chair. If this checks out, it's not just forgery or civil fraud. That's money laundering territory. We notify federal investigators. He filed a referral with the Economic Crimes Unit. Within days, a judge signed an order to trace overseas accounts. The headline the following week blared, Mark Thompson under scrutiny for international transfers, possible money laundering probe. On television, Mark's face finally betrayed him. The smile was gone. His eyes darted away from cameras. The man who once leaned into lights and lenses had become prey to them. Sarah came to me in the quiet of night, her voice raw. Dad, he says I'm being set up. He says you want revenge. I took her hands in mine. I don't want revenge, Sarah. I want the truth. If he's innocent, let the evidence clear him. But if he's broken the law, you must let justice do its work. She dissolved into tears. I don't even know who I am anymore. I smoothed her hair, the old ache hollowing my chest. You're still my daughter. You just need to relearn the difference between real and false. Outside, the moon cut the snow in sharp silver. Inside, David kept turning pages, following paper trails and bank ledgers. For the first time since this nightmare began, Mark was losing his greatest weapon, narrative control. The money he'd hoped would buy impunity now threatened to be the rope that tied his downfall. The long fight stretched ahead. Court dates, subpoenas, forensic testimony. The legal apparatus spun into motion. But on that night, under the bright glare of a lamp and the hush of falling snow, I let myself feel something like relief. For the first time, the law had a hold on the truth. Mark might still have lawyers, money, and bravado, but he no longer had the story unquestioned. And in a small, stubborn corner of my soul, I began to believe we could win this, not for vengeance, but to bring my daughter back from the shadow he'd placed her under. 3 days later, the headlines hit like thunder. FBI confirms investigation into businessman Mark Thompson's offshore accounts. It exploded across Hamilton like a bomb. Within 48 hours, investors pulled every dollar. Thompson Investments collapsed. Banks froze more than $2.7 million in company and personal assets. His luxury home was sealed by federal order. Employees were summoned for questioning. I sat in Lucy's small upstairs room, watching the news quietly. No satisfaction, no triumph, just relief. Like a stone that had sat on my chest for months had finally rolled off. David called soon after, voice steady, focused. "We're halfway there, Mr. Miller. Once the court verifies Helen's will, you'll officially regain ownership of your home." I smiled faintly. "Thank you, David. You've done what your father once promised me, that justice never goes out of style." But Mark wasn't finished. That night, he appeared at the bakery door. No suit, no polished shoes. He wore a black coat dusted with snow, eyes sunken, stubble rough across his jaw. "George," he rasped, "give me 5 minutes." I nodded. Lucy stepped back cautiously, watching. He pulled out a leather bag, heavy with cash, and a folded sheet of paper. $300,000, he said. "Drop the case. I'll sign the house back to you. Let's end it here." I stared at him in silence. Under the amber light, his face looked wrecked, the face of a man cornered by his own lies. "Why now?" I asked quietly. "Because I'm out of options," he said hoarsely. "And you're not getting any younger, George. You want to spend your last years stuck in a courtroom?" I laid a hand on the bag, then pushed it gently back toward him. "Mark, that's where you're wrong. You think justice can be bought, but I'm not after money. I'm after the truth, and for my daughter to finally be free from the lies you've built around her." He slammed his hand on the table, his voice low and sharp. "If I go down, I'll take everyone with me, including Sarah." I met his eyes, calm, steady, cold. "If you ever loved her, then let her see you pay for what you've done." He stood there for a moment, trembling with rage, then turned and walked out into the snow. The smell of cigarettes and desperation lingered long after he was gone. Lucy came out from behind the counter, her hand on my shoulder. "Aren't you afraid he might do something reckless?" I smiled faintly. "Of course I am, but I believe in the law, and in David." 2 days later, David filed a motion to expand the federal investigation. This time it included hard proof, bank statements from the Cayman Islands showing that Mark had funneled money from 3 fake subsidiaries into his personal account. The FBI moved quickly, opening a full criminal case for money laundering and investment fraud. That night, every TV station carried the same breaking story. Mark Thompson arrested for financial fraud. FBI freezes offshore accounts. On screen, Mark was led out of his office in handcuffs. Head down, face pale, reporters shouting questions over the winter wind. "Do you have anything to say to your wife's family?" one called out. He said nothing. I sat watching, tears welling in my eyes. Not joy, but mourning, for the man he could have been, before greed devoured him whole. Around midnight my phone buzzed. It was Sarah. Her voice shook through the static. "Dad, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I've been blind for too long." I closed my eyes, breathing in the silence between us. "Come home, Sarah," I whispered. "It's still your home, but this time we'll rebuild it, with truth." Outside, the snow had stopped. The first light of dawn crept through the window, falling across Helen's photo on the wall. I looked at her smiling face and murmured, "We did it, Helen." Justice finally found its voice. The night after Mark's arrest, the city of Hamilton woke as if from a long collective sleep. Every screen, every front page blazed with the same headline: Businessman Mark Thompson arrested for financial fraud, money laundering, and forging property transfers from his father-in-law. The Hamilton voice ran a photograph of me, an old man with silver hair standing before a small wooden house, eyes shadowed but steady. Behind me, someone had planted a handmade sign that read, "Justice served." That morning, when I stepped out onto the street, people stopped me. Some shook my hand, others patted my shoulder. "Mr. Miller, you did the right thing. Thank you for reminding us. Justice isn't something far away." I smiled, but inside I felt only stillness. I hadn't fought for praise, I had fought so the truth could be heard. Lucy handed me another newspaper, USA Today, Regional Edition. Across the page ran a feature titled, "The Carpenter Who Fought Back." The byline, "Tommy Reynolds, the young reporter who'd first told my story." His words walked readers through everything: the betrayal, the eviction, the church confrontation, the lawsuit, the long road to justice. He wrote, "George Miller didn't just reclaim his home. He reclaimed the meaning of honesty, a value the modern world seems to have misplaced." The piece spread like wildfire. Tens of thousands of shares, hundreds of heartfelt comments. They called me the unbroken father, but not everyone celebrated. From jail, Mark's media allies tried to salvage what was left of his reputation. A business news channel he once invested in released a piece titled, "Mark Thompson, Failed Investor or Victim of a Family Feud." They spliced courtroom footage, me looking stern, Sarah crying, and spun a new headline, "When Money Divides Blood." The story sowed seeds of doubt. Some readers began to waver. Maybe that old man went too far. You never know. The media loves drama. I didn't get angry. I understood. Truth always bleeds before it's believed. David reminded me, "Don't worry, Mr. Miller. Lies don't age well. Give it time." And time delivered. Just days later, the New York Ledger, one of the biggest national papers, dropped a 10-page investigation built from FBI case files. Front page headline, "Mark Thompson's Empire of Lies." The expose listed 6 shell companies used for laundering money alongside sworn employee testimonies. One quote spread across every network. "He once told us, 'I can rebuild anything, as long as that old man keeps his mouth shut.'" That single sentence detonated across social media. A storm erupted, not of gossip but of outrage and empathy. Letters and messages poured in, from fathers, mothers, people who'd been betrayed by those they loved most. Some thanked me, others shared their own pain. I read every word, and for the first time I cried. Not from sorrow, but from connection. Lucy put a hand on my shoulder. "See, George, your story was never just about a house. It's about standing firm in a world that keeps asking us to bend." I nodded slowly. "Maybe. But the price, it still hurts, Lucy." She smiled gently. "Good, because only real wounds leave scars that mean something." That afternoon, the local TV station invited me to appear on their live show, Voices of Hamilton. The host asked, "Mr. Miller, if you could say one thing to Mark right now, what would it be?" I looked straight into the camera and spoke slowly. "Mark, you won every battle built on lies until you met an old man with nothing left to lose. And when a man has nothing left to lose, he fears no one." The studio fell silent. Then applause, long rising, unbroken. That night, the program reached its highest ratings of the year. But what stayed with me wasn't the applause or the headlines. It was a single message waiting on my phone when I got home. "Dad, I watched the show. I'm proud of you. Sarah." I stared at the screen, heart tight in my chest. Maybe, after all this time, the real victory wasn't about reclaiming a house, but reclaiming the heart of the daughter I thought I'd lost. A week after the broadcast, my story broke free from the borders of Hamilton. Papers across Ohio, and soon across America, carried the headlines: "The Unbroken Father, a Man Who Stood Against Betrayal, When Justice Wears the Face of a Carpenter." A lesson in integrity and fatherhood in the age of greed. National networks started calling. Producers wanted interviews. At first I refused. I didn't want pity or to be paraded like a symbol. But David said, "You should speak, George, not for yourself, for the people who are still silent, like you once were." So I agreed. The recording took place in a bright studio in Columbus. The lights were blinding, the cameras sweeping across a packed audience. The host was Linda Parker, a well-known journalist with a calm voice and kind eyes. "Mr. Miller," she began, "the entire country is watching. Do you think your story has grown beyond the courtroom?" I took a deep breath. "I don't think this is about winning or losing," I said. "It's about holding on to what's right, even when doing what's right costs you everything." Linda nodded, then glanced toward the backstage curtain. "Tonight," she said softly, "we have someone here who wants to say something to you." The audience murmured. The stage door opened, and there she was, Sarah. Thinner, pale, eyes rimmed with red. She wore a simple black dress and clutched a trembling piece of paper in her hands. The entire room fell silent. I rose to my feet, my heart pounding. Sarah looked at me, tears welling. "Dad," her voice cracked, "I hurt you. I let myself be blinded. I believed lies. And worse, I lived inside them." She unfolded the paper, her hands shaking, and began to read through tears. "I want to apologize to my father, and to my mother, who I know is watching from somewhere. I forgot where home was. I forgot who never stopped waiting for me. I'm not asking for forgiveness right away, and I just want him to know I'm still his daughter." People in the audience began to cry. Linda gently placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "No one is perfect," she said, "but the courage to admit your mistakes, that's real redemption." I walked toward Sarah and pulled her into my arms. She trembled against me, just like she did when she was little and thunder frightened her. I whispered through the lump in my throat, "I never stopped loving you, Sarah. Not for a single day." Applause erupted. First a few claps, then a wave. The whole studio rose to its feet. Linda spoke into the microphone. "This isn't just a story about justice. It's a story about forgiveness." That moment spread across the internet like wildfire. Within hours, the clip, "Sarah Miller embraces her father live on air," went viral. Over 20 million views in 2 days. People called it the forgiveness moment. The next morning, every major paper carried the story. Sarah Miller, daughter of disgraced investor Mark Thompson, publicly apologizes and confirms husband's fraud. It was the final blow. Mark's company was delisted. Investors fled. The empire he'd built on deception collapsed completely. As for me, I became something I never asked to be, a symbol. The father who wouldn't break. Every day, hundreds of letters arrived, from parents, from children, from strangers who'd known betrayal and silence. One letter broke me completely. It came from a woman named Margaret, 72. "Mr. Miller, my son threw me out of our home 10 years ago. I stayed quiet all this time, but after reading about you, yesterday, I knocked on his door. I didn't ask for an apology. I just wanted him to know I still love him, same as the first day. When I finished reading, I looked up. Sunlight was streaming through the window, glinting off my rough, calloused hands. The same hands that had built a house, held a hammer, raised a child. And for the first time in years, I realized they still had strength left, enough to rebuild everything I'd lost." 2 months after the broadcast that shook the nation, Sarah and I were invited to the National Media Conference in Chicago, themed "When Truth Heals." The event gathered hundreds of journalists, psychologists, and social advocates. I wasn't comfortable with crowds, never had been. But Sarah said, "Dad, I want people to know that mistakes aren't the end, as long as we have the courage to make them right." So I went. That morning, the auditorium hall glowed beneath a sea of lights. Rows of people filled every seat. On the massive screen behind the stage, the host introduced us. Today's story is about a father who lost everything, and a daughter brave enough to come home. When Sarah and I walked out together, the applause thundered through the hall, long, sustained, heartfelt. Sarah gripped my hand tightly, afraid to let go. Under the spotlight, she no longer looked fragile. She looked like a woman who had learned strength the hardest way possible, through truth. The host asked, "Mr. Miller, what kept your faith alive when everyone turned their back on you?" I answered slowly, choosing each word. "Because I believe the truth never dies. It just gets buried under the dust of lies. But sooner or later, the wind always blows that dust away." The room went quiet. Then applause again, rolling like a wave. Sarah looked at me, trembling, then leaned into the microphone. I used to think my father was stubborn, old-fashioned. But really he was just holding on to what's right while I'd let it slip away. Without him, I would have never found my way back to myself. Her voice broke. I'm sorry, Dad. I love you. I placed a hand on her shoulder, my own voice catching. I love you too, Sarah. And your mother. I know she's proud of you. The audience rose to their feet, clapping through tears. A young reporter called out from the crowd, Mr. Miller, do you realize you've become a symbol? I smiled softly. If I am, then let me be a symbol of one thing, that forgiveness is the second half of justice. After the conference, the story spread across every major outlet. The Washington Herald wrote, The story of George and Sarah Miller has become a testament to the enduring strength of family and integrity. A few weeks later, the state of Ohio announced a new legal aid initiative for elder victims of fraud, named the Miller Act. They asked me to serve as an honorary advisor. I agreed, not for recognition, but to make sure no one else had to endure what I once did. Sarah, too, found her purpose. She began working with women's advocacy groups, helping those who'd suffered financial control or emotional manipulation in their marriages. One evening, as we walked along the river, she said, I can't erase the past, Dad, but I can make it the reason I live better. I squeezed her hand and whispered, That's enough, Sarah. That's more than enough. That night, when we returned to Hamilton, we drove past the old wooden house, once a battlefield, now peaceful again. The windows glowed warm. Our neighbors had rehung the sign they'd made months ago, the House of Truth. Sarah stopped, tears welling. I want to keep that sign, Dad, to remind me every day that the truth, no matter how painful, is always worth protecting. I smiled. Your mother would have liked that. Outside, the first snow began to fall, flakes catching the golden streetlight like sparks in the night. Sarah leaned her head on my shoulder. I held her hand, the same hand I'd once guided through a winter storm, long ago. The snow was still cold, but my heart was warm, because I finally understood. Every wound can heal, when truth and love stand side by side. The trial of Mark Thompson was set for Monday morning, June 5th. The entire city of Hamilton seemed to hold its breath. Reporters packed the steps of the Hamilton Federal Courthouse, where the American flag snapped sharply in the wind. The name George Miller was no longer just that of a carpenter. It had become a symbol of integrity standing firm against betrayal. I wore the old suit Helen once bought me, carrying a small wooden box that held her handwritten will in our wedding photo. David walked beside me, calm but fierce, his eyes glinting like steel. Sarah was there too, pale, exhausted, but resolute. She no longer hid in silence. Across the plaza, Mark stepped out of the police van. Gray suit, wrists cuffed, head still held high, cameras flashed. He forced a thin smile and told reporters, I will prove my innocence. A journalist called out, Do you have anything to say to your former father-in-law? Mark paused, glanced toward me, and said bitterly, No, he never treated me like a son. The words stung. I had once wished he'd learned how to be a son-in-law before trying to be a businessman. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Spectators, press, community members, even old neighbors from Maple Street. Judge Eleanor Briggs, a stern woman in her 50s known for her fairness, tapped her gavel. Court is now in session. The defendant, Mark Thompson, is charged with 3 counts: property fraud, forgery of notarized documents, and international money laundering. The prosecution began with a barrage of evidence: Cayman Island bank statements, fingerprint forgeries, and sworn testimony from accountant Nancy Hill. Each document appeared on the large courtroom screen, one damning piece after another. Then David rose, calm, deliberate, and grounded. Your Honor, my client, Mr. George Miller, was not only robbed of his home, but of his dignity, branded as mentally unfit to remember his own life. We are not here for revenge. We are here because truth deserves to be put back in its rightful place. Mark sat still, jaw clenched. His lawyer, Robert Klein, countered quickly. Your Honor, my client is a victim of misunderstanding. Mr. Miller voluntarily signed the transfer papers. The offshore accounts were merely to safeguard investments, not to conceal them. Judge Briggs leaned forward. Then why the hidden accounts in the Cayman Islands? Klein hesitated. Strategic business purposes, Your Honor. The prosecutor cut in dryly. Strategic business, or strategic tax evasion. A murmur rippled through the room. Mark's composure faltered. Beads of sweat rolled down his temple. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand holding Helen's photo. My voice trembled but stayed clear. The house at 143 Maple Street isn't an investment property. It's the home my wife and I built with our hands. In her will, she wrote, "This is a house of love. It must never be sold like a commodity." But the defendant did exactly that. He deceived my daughter, forged my signature, and tried to bury our family's memories under his debts. I opened the small wooden box and handed the will to the clerk. Judge Briggs examined it, nodding. "This is the verified original. Forensic tests confirm the ink and paper date." "The document is legally valid." From the gallery, Sarah began to cry. I turned, met her eyes, and gave a small nod. Klein immediately jumped up. "Your Honor, we have evidence Mr. Miller once agreed to mortgage the house for financial reasons." David stepped forward, holding another document. "And here," he said, "is the forensic report proving that signature was digitally pasted. Columbus Forensics confirmed it's a forgery." Judge Briggs frowned. "Mr. Thompson, would you like to explain this?" Mark stood shakily. His voice cracked. I only did what my financial advisor told me. I never meant to hurt anyone." David's voice cut through the air. "And that advisor would be your brother, currently under federal investigation for laundering money, correct?" The courtroom erupted with whispers. Mark froze, unable to speak. When the judge called recess, I stepped into the hallway. Sarah rushed into my arms, sobbing. "Dad, I told them everything. I testified." I couldn't keep defending his lies. I stroked her hair and whispered, "You just did the bravest thing you'll ever do, Sarah." David joined us quietly. "We're winning, Mr. Miller. But tomorrow, that's when we end it." I looked out the courthouse window. The sky was overcast, wind whipping the American flag high above the steps. Tomorrow, I thought, justice will finally have a name. The second day of the trial dawned under a relentless rain. Hamilton was swallowed by a gray fog, but inside the courthouse, the air burned like fire. Everyone knew. This was the day of reckoning. Mark sat at the defendant's table, head bowed, his suit wrinkled and damp. His lawyer, Robert Klein, still tried to project calm professionalism, but I could see the unease flickering in his eyes. Beside me, David gripped the thick folder in his hands. Inside it lay our final card, the piece we'd kept hidden until now. Judge Briggs struck her gavel, her voice steady and sharp. "This court is now in session. Does the defense have anything to add?" Klein rose, his tone low and deliberate. "Your Honor, we'd like to submit new evidence. A copy of a life insurance policy signed by Mr. George Miller, confirming the transfer of benefits to the Thompsons. This proves Mr. Miller willingly transferred his assets." A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom. I glanced at David. His face remained calm. He'd anticipated this move. David stood. "Your Honor, we request to see the original document." Klein smiled faintly. "Unfortunately, the original has been misplaced, but the copy includes certified digital verification." David's voice turned cool. "Certified? From whose email account?" Klein hesitated. "From Mr. John Thompson, the financial advisor." David's lips curved slightly. "The defendant's brother, currently under investigation for money laundering. The same man with full access to the defendant's accounts." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Klein paled. Judge Briggs slammed her gavel. "Order! Order in the court!" David took a step forward, pulling a document from his folder. "Your Honor, this is the digital forensics report. The signature on that policy was sent from an IP address registered to Thompson Holdings. At the same time, the defendant made illegal offshore transfers. This proves the document is a digitally fabricated forgery." A new wave of gasps filled the room. Klein stammered, "That's merely a coincidence." Judge Briggs cut him off. "Mr. Klein, this court does not recognize coincidences when forensic evidence says otherwise. Sit down." I looked over at Mark. His face had gone pale, beads of sweat sliding down his neck. I could see it. His empire of lies was collapsing before his eyes. Judge Briggs turned to the prosecutor. "Call your final witness." The back doors opened. Sarah walked in. Her footsteps echoed softly across the floor, yet the sound struck the room like thunder. She wore a plain white blouse, her hands trembling, but her eyes clear and unwavering. "Mrs. Sarah Miller Thompson," the judge said. "Are you ready to take the oath?" Sarah nodded. "I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth." David stepped closer, his tone gentle. Mrs. Thompson, did you know that Mark Thompson forged your father's signature? Sarah lowered her gaze. A tear slipped down her cheek. At first I didn't. He told me it was just a small financial formality. But when I found out about the account in the Cayman Islands, I confronted him, and he slapped me. The room fell silent. Even the rain outside seemed to stop. She went on, her voice shaking but clear. He said if I told anyone, my father would die of shame. He told me I had to stand by my new family, but my father, he never hated me. He stayed silent. And that silence, that love, made me realize only he was truly family. I bowed my head. My old hands trembled as hot tears fell onto them. I didn't know if it was sorrow or pride or both. David leaned toward me and whispered, "We don't need to say another word. She just said everything." Klein jumped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This testimony is emotional, not legally relevant." Judge Briggs' reply was firm, almost fierce. "No, Mr. Klein. It's more relevant than anything in this courtroom. It reveals motive and truth." Mark shot up from his chair, shouting, "You're lying! Sarah, you owe me your life. I did everything for you." Sarah turned, tears streaming down her face. "No, Mark. You did everything for money, and money killed the man you used to be." Mark slammed his fists on the table, yelling incoherently as the bailiffs rushed to restrain him. Chaos erupted. Judge Briggs' voice rose above the noise, the gavel hammering like thunder. "Order! Mr. Thompson, one more outburst and you'll be held in contempt." Mark froze. Then slowly, he collapsed back into his chair, hands clutching his head. The room sank into an eerie, heavy silence. Judge Briggs looked at the clock, then spoke softly but firmly. "This court will recess for 15 minutes. After that, I will deliver the verdict." Sarah walked over to me. Her hands were cold, trembling, but strong as they wrapped around mine. I squeezed back, my voice breaking. "You did the right thing, Sarah. Your mother must be smiling now." David glanced at us, then at the judge's bench. He nodded once. 15 more minutes, he said quietly. Then justice will have a name." When the sound of the gavel echoed again, everyone in the courtroom fell silent. Outside, the rain hadn't stopped, each drop hitting the window frame like the heartbeat of the room itself. Judge Briggs took her seat, calm but commanding, her face unreadable. "The court will now resume," she said evenly. After reviewing all presented evidence, forensic reports, and witness testimony, this court has reached a verdict. Mark sat hunched over, his hair hanging over his forehead. His lawyer, Klein, clasped his hands together, eyes hollow with defeat. Beside me, Sarah gripped the hem of her blouse, trembling. David rested a hand on my shoulder, a quiet signal that the moment had come. Judge Briggs's voice cut through the air like a blade. "This court finds the defendant, Mark Thompson, guilty on all 3 counts: financial fraud, forgery of notarized documents, international money laundering. Under Title 18, Section 1443 of the United States Federal Code, the defendant is hereby sentenced to 17 years in federal prison. Furthermore, he is ordered to return all misappropriated assets, including the property at 143 Maple Street, to the rightful owner, Mr. George Miller." A low murmur rippled through the courtroom before falling into stunned silence. I felt my heart stop for half a beat. Sarah covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Judge Briggs continued. "The court also acknowledges the honesty and cooperation of witness Sarah Miller Thompson, whose testimony was essential in uncovering the truth." Mark suddenly shot to his feet, his voice cracking. "No, I did this for my family, for her, for everything I lost." The bailiffs rushed forward, holding him back as he thrashed against them. His voice broke, filled with bitterness. "That old man took everything from me. He always wanted me to fail." I looked at him, not with hate but with a deep emptiness. "No, Mark," I said softly, but loud enough for him to hear. "You took everything from yourself, the moment you chose deceit over decency." He froze, then slumped forward, the fight draining from his body. As the officers escorted him out, he turned once toward Sarah. For a fleeting second, his eyes held no rage, only confusion and regret. Judge Briggs struck her gavel one last time. "This court is adjourned." The sound was dry, final, yet to me it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The room erupted into applause, not loud but like a single wave of release washing over us all. David turned to me with a gentle smile. We did it, Mr. George. We won. I gripped his hand tightly, emotion catching in my throat. Sarah threw her arms around me, sobbing. Dad, we got the house back. We can go home again. I smiled faintly. It's not just a house, sweetheart. It's our faith. Coming home. A week later, I stood once again before the house on Maple Street. The wooden door still bore marks from the new lock, but when I touched it, it opened easily, as if the house itself had been waiting for me. Light spilled into the living room, glinting off the photo of Helen that still hung on the wall, dusted but untouched. I wiped the glass gently, tracing the curve of her smile. We did it, Helen, I whispered. We kept it safe, our home and our daughter. Sarah stepped inside, holding a bouquet of white tulips. She placed them on the table. Mom loved these, didn't she? I nodded. She used to say, tulips bloom in the cold because beauty only survives through struggle. Sarah smiled through her tears. I sat by the window, watching the neighborhood gather outside. They were clapping, cheering. Lucy stood among them, holding up the morning paper. Across the front page, the headline read, Justice Restored for the Unbroken Father. I waved to her, smiling, then turned to Sarah. See, honey, in the end, the light always wins over the dark. She squeezed my hand. Because you never let it go out, Dad. That evening, I stood on the porch, the sky clearing after the storm. Sunlight pierced through the gray clouds, pouring golden light over the rain-soaked street. In that moment, I finally understood. Justice isn't something you wait for others to deliver. It's something you hold on to, even when the world tells you to let go. I whispered, to myself and to Helen, somewhere far beyond the clouds. Justice isn't revenge. It's a reminder that truth always comes with a cost, and that cost is worth paying. As the wind swept across the porch, carrying the faint scent of pine and rain, I smiled, because at last I was truly home. Federal Detention Center, Doradziveritor 9 on the outskirts of Dayton looked nothing like the glass towers Mark used to stride into. No carpeted conference rooms, no Arabica coffee for the CEO, no polished leather shoes clicking down hallways, just the sting of bleach, the clank of steel locks, and the indifferent pulse of a wall clock. On day one, he was issued an orange uniform and a number, #OH 47291. A guard rattled off the rules like a firing squad: wake-up times, work shifts, mail restrictions, phone calls limited to 10 minutes a week. Everything fixed, like an invisible shackle. Mark nodded, but his eyes dulled. A man used to giving orders was learning how to take them. They assigned him to the prison print shop, 6 hours a day on a binding machine, 28 cents an hour. Fingers that once wore gold rings came away smudged with ink, cracked by chemicals. He asked the floor boss, any chance I can switch to something more suitable? The guy looked him over and snorted. More suitable like what? Typing forged signatures? At night, he lay on the lower bunk, staring at a ceiling the color of wet concrete. His mind replayed the moment the cuffs closed in front of the cameras. He hated the flash, hated the voices, hated the steady snore of the tattooed man above him, sawing air like a compressor. Every time he shut his eyes, the number returned, 17 years, a hallway with no exits. Week 2, his attorney, Klein, came to visit. The glass between them felt like ice. Do we still have a shot at appeal? Mark pressed. Klein exhaled. Cayman ledgers, the signature forensics, insider testimony. The appellate court rarely flips a case like this. Best case is good behavior. Good behavior, Mark echoed. You want me to learn how to be a person? My only mistake was losing. Klein studied him. Your mistake was believing everything is a game. Back in his cell, a thin envelope waited. The return line read, Sarah M. He hesitated, tore it open. Mark, I filed for divorce. Please don't write again. I'll answer whatever the authorities ask. Be honest. It's the only part left worth saving. Sarah. The paper shook in his hands. He flung it into the trash, then, moments later, knelt to fish it out, smoothing it like a desperate ritual. For the first time, his tears came. Not a flood, just a slow leak through a new crack. Outside, the news didn't flinch. Each week, another shard of the collapse. Thompson Investments filed. Chapter 11, investors launched claims. A widened tax probe showed 5 years of shell games. On TV, The clip of me holding Sarah played beside the footage of Mark led away in cuffs, contrast as cruel as a split screen can get. Inside, businessman meant nothing. To some inmates, he was prey, the white-collar thief who took from the elderly. Mark learned to keep quiet, to lower his eyes in the corridor. A guard told him, "You're an inmate, not an actor. Don't perform for us." On night 30, the prison cut the power for a systems check. Darkness dropped like a soaked blanket. Mark realized the terror wasn't the 17 years. It was the sameness of every day. Meaning shrank to the width of a blanket and the length of a steel bed. He dreamed. Another Christmas dinner, warm light, laughter, no angles, no schemes. In the dream, he apologized on time, hung up on the partner on time, refused the dirty contract. He woke to gray ceiling, bleach in the air, and one name hammered into his skull like a nail. George, Morning Bell. He rose, made his bed, laced his shoes, and walked to the print shop. White paper slid through his hands, spines clicked shut. Each stack stamped with a lot number, OH47291, a brand he'd see again and again, like a mocking logo for the last empire he owned, a line of $1 notebooks. And so the first winter of his sentence began. Beyond the stone walls, the world kept moving. For Mark, it arrived secondhand. Days-old papers and scraps of cafeteria gossip. Month 4, a long-form special aired, The Path of Dirty Money. The host traced ledgers, emails, phone logs, rebuilding how Mark had used real estate investments to hide holes. Nancy, the former accountant, looked straight into camera. "He told us money washes clean if it makes enough loops. I just didn't know the loop would end in prison." In the common room, inmates jeered. Someone elbowed him. "Hey, CEO, you're famous." Mark pressed his lips together and left before the segment ended. He'd learned the loser's reflex. Avoid mirrors. Month 6, another letter. From his mother. "Son, I'm old. I won't defend you, but know this. Money wasn't your worst sin. Your worst sin was using people as tools. I pray you learn to see people as people again. Mom." He slid the letter into a plastic box under his bunk. A graveyard for words he didn't want to reread. But that night he pulled it back out and understood why he couldn't sleep. The faces, George, Sarah, employees who once applauded his vision, investors who lost their savings, all returned, pale and unblinking. At the print shop, a guard moved him to quality control. Slower work. Precise. For the first time, he felt a pinprick of completion, a crate of notebooks, clean spines, no ink bleed, no reports to beautify, no metrics to optimize, just reality, a job to do right. At night, he joined the GED class, not for the certificate, but for the window with a sliver of sky. The volunteer teacher, an old man with a quiet voice, read aloud, "No prison can hold the person who chooses honesty." The class laughed. Mark didn't. The line slipped between his ribs, leaving a thin burn. Honesty, once an inconvenience, felt like a luxury now. News of Sarah filtered in via local TV. She worked with a group helping women escape financial control, telling her own story. They called her a courageous survivor. Mark watched her speak from behind a lectern, voice firm. For an instant he wanted to shout that he'd loved her once, that it hadn't all been a plan, but the story didn't need him anymore. Maybe that was justice too, the betrayer left out of the history he created. Midway through year 1, a scuffle broke out. His bunkmate swung wild, and Mark caught a fist along the cheekbone. The bruise spread purple-green to his ear. The guard wrote it up and noted Mark hadn't swung back. They moved him to a good conduct unit, a cell half a step wider, with a small shelf of books. On the bottom, he found a worn paperback, Lessons from a Carpenter. A line was underlined. "A house isn't made by wood, it's made by the promise to keep it." He dozed off and, shockingly, slept without dreaming of cuffs. Outside, the class action settled. What was left of Mark's personal assets were seized and auctioned off. The Swiss watch he'd paraded, the wine collection, the sports car, gone. A paper sniped, auctioning an empire of illusions. He didn't read it, but he heard. Each item listed felt like another nail closing the coffin on his career. One night he asked for paper. He wrote to George, wrote, tore it up, wrote again, tore it up. In the end, he sent one line. "I'm not asking forgiveness. I just want to say I was wrong. If there's anything I can do to make it right, tell me." There was no reply. But a small door opened inside him. He had finally stopped lying to himself. By year 2, Mark's face had hollowed, but the edge in his eyes had softened. He knew the rhythms now, the counts, the surprise searches, the print shop grind. Sometimes he taught a younger inmate how to read a pay stub, not to maximize profit, but so the kid knew what he earned and what was being docked. A guard passing by murmured, "Good to see you using your head for something decent." Mark didn't answer, but the words lingered. Outside, the fever broke. The headlines cooled. His saga slid from breaking news to a case study in community college ethics. A teacher blogged, "The Mark Thompson case should be taught as a classic trade-off, ethics mortgaged for growth." Inside, they made him an assistant in the library. Odd work, shelving untouched books, dusting forgotten stories. On the lowest shelf, he found a Bible. He opened it at random. His eyes stopped at a line, "The truth will set you free." He laughed once, dry, a little late. A few days later, he opened to the same page. This time, he didn't laugh. One autumn morning, a crew from the Miller Act came in, a program protecting seniors from fraud. They screened a short video on spotting predatory contracts. At the end, the camera found me on my porch, speaking slowly, "Don't sign if your heart feels uneasy." From the back row, Mark's shadow stretched long on the floor. He watched me, no anger left, just an old sadness. When it ended, the coordinator asked for volunteers to write simple financial advice letters to seniors. Mark raised his hand. "You think you can write those, Mr. Thompson?" "I think I owe them, and I owe myself an honest answer." He began drafting one-pagers, 5 signs of a scam contract, why you shouldn't mortgage your home for a relative's project, how to verify a notarized signature. The tone was plain, unadorned. Once he wrote a special sheet titled "Things I Wish I Hadn't Done." The coordinator read it, quiet for a long time. "I'm going to ask permission to print this widely." Late that year, a package arrived, a spiral notebook from another facility, the cover stamped, "The House of Truth." Inside, no words, just a card. "From an old man who once lost his home and found it again. Use this to write your truth. G." Mark sat still, a long time. G could be George, or maybe goodbye to the life he'd clung to. He set the notebook on the shelf beside the Bible and Lessons from a Carpenter, then opened to page 1 and wrote, "Day. I'm going to count by what I do right, not by the years I have left." Beyond the walls, Sarah and I found a quiet rhythm. We fixed the house, opened a community corner on weekends, basic legal workshops for seniors, a free woodcraft class for kids. On the wall, I hung a small sign, "Family is a promise kept." Sometimes I thought of Mark, not with anger, but with a hope that he might spend what's left learning how to keep one promise, even late. On the 3rd Christmas after the trial, a censored envelope arrived from the prison. Inside, a short note. "George, I read more now, work more, and lie less. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I just want you to know I donate my small wages to the Miller Act every month. Consider it returning what I took. Merry Christmas. Mark." I folded the letter and set it on the mantel by Helen's photo. Sarah poured tea. "Will you write back, Dad?" I smiled. "I'll send him a new wooden notebook, so he can keep writing." Outside, snow sifted down like salt. Christmas lights trembled in the window, soft and warm. I realized that the consequences had landed where they needed to. Fame gone, freedom gone, and larger still, the illusion dismantled piece by piece. Some miles away, a man in a prison uniform bent over a notebook stamped "The House of Truth." The pen moved slowly but surely, and maybe for the first time in his life he was building something not to sell. That's why aftermath isn't only punishment. It's a late chance for a soul to relearn straight lines. For me, that's enough to close the old chapter and open the next with 2 words: quiet peace. Winter nights in prison lasted longer than the sentence itself, not because time moved slowly, but because memories refused to sleep. When the lights went out, Mark faced the only cellmate he couldn't escape, himself. Nightmares had become loyal companions. Every night he dreamed of the old house on Maple Street, but it was never whole. The roof had caved in, windows shattered, and in the middle of the living room burned a half-charred family photo. Helen stood in the flames, holding a young Sarah in her arms. George appeared beside them, sadness soft in his eyes. "Do you know, Mark?" George said in the dream. "Every lie eventually comes home to its owner." Mark screamed, "I didn't mean to. I just wanted to keep everything. I just wanted to be loved." But George's voice faded into the smoke, and Helen turned to him, no hatred in her eyes, only pity. You had everything, she said quietly. You just didn't know how to keep it. He woke with a gasp, pillow damp, heart hammering. For the first time, he didn't dare close his eyes again. From that night on, Mark began recording his dreams in the House of Truth. Each page became a shard of memory, each line another scar. By March, the snow had melted. The prison started a program called Letters to Loved Ones. He sat in the library for hours, staring at a blank sheet of paper. Then he began to write, not to beg forgiveness, but to confess. Sarah, if you're reading this, it means your father helped send it. I know you hesitated. Maybe you didn't want to hear my voice ever again. But think of this as a letter from someone already dead, trying to return the pieces of a memory he broke. The first time I lied to your father, I told myself it was for business. The first time I forged his signature, I told myself it was just procedure. Step by step, I stopped knowing who I was. I turned intelligence into camouflage for sin, love into currency for gain. And when it all collapsed, shame was the only thing left standing. You were right, Sarah. On that TV program years ago, you said, money killed the man inside him. I've replayed that clip 100 times, and each time you looked stronger, a strength I never had. I once tried to fight the world. Now I'm only fighting myself, to stop being the liar I became. If I could give you one thing, it would be this. Never let anyone convince you you must trade your conscience to be loved. I don't expect forgiveness. Forgiveness is a gift only the truly noble can give, and I have no right to ask. I just want you to know I've begun living as a real man, even here at the lowest point of my life. I pray every night, not for early release, but so that if you ever walk past these prison gates, you won't have to lower your head in shame. I love you, Sarah, for the first time, not out of fear of losing you, but because you deserve to be loved the right way. Mark. When he folded the letter, he felt lighter, as if a weight he'd carried for 4 years had finally slipped off his back. He didn't mail it yet. Instead, he placed it between the pages of the House of Truth. Later, he whispered, when she's ready. That night, he sat by the library window, watching stars spill across the sky. Somewhere beyond the wall, the loudspeaker played Silent Night. The melody sounded distant, almost like it came from another lifetime. Mark closed his eyes. He saw George, same old sweater, hands wrapped around a cup of tea, gaze steady as oak. Thank you, Mark murmured. For not hating me, for letting me learn what regret really means. The next morning, during mail call, the warden handed him a slip of paper, a note from George. I received your letter. I don't need your apology. I just need you to keep living honestly. The rest, God will handle. Mark read it, and for the first time in years, smiled. Small, quiet, real. Days turned into months. Each night he wrote one line in his notebook. Not about guilt, but about small decencies, helping a new inmate write home, reading to a man who couldn't read, breaking up a fight before it started. He began measuring time not by how many years remained, but by how many days he managed to live right. By the 5th spring, sunlight spilled through the bars. Mark stood, opened the notebook, and wrote one last line. I can't fix the past, but I can bury it with the truth. He set down the pen and closed his eyes. For the first time in 4 years, sleep came deep and peaceful. No snow, no George, no Helen, only light through an open window. When the warden made his morning rounds, he found Mark sitting upright, head resting on one hand, the House of Truth open before him, a faint smile still on his lips. On the desk, the final page glistened with fresh ink. I understand now, George. Regret isn't punishment. It's how a soul cleanses itself. And if I ever live again, even for one day, I'd rather be an honest man than a successful one. The warden closed the notebook gently and placed it over the prisoner's heart. Outside, dawn was breaking. Sunlight streamed through the bars and landed on the cover's embossed words, The House of Truth. It was an early summer morning. Sunlight spilled through the maple leaves outside my porch, painting gold across the old steps of the house on Maple Street, a house that once held tragedy, now reborn as a beginning. From the backyard came laughter, the kind that only children can make. Sarah was there, teaching a group of kids how to sand and paint wooden nameplates, showing them how to carve the names of people they love. The air smelled of fresh paint and cedar. The same house that had once been silent and cold was now filled with life, with the rhythm of hammers and joy. 4 years had passed since the trial. My life had found such peace that sometimes I forgot how hard I had fought to earn it. But then I'd glance at the small sign hanging by the front gate, the House of Truth, and I'd remember, some stories must be retold, not for the sake of the past, but to keep others from repeating it. I no longer hated Mark, maybe because he had paid his price. Maybe because I finally understood. We aren't born perfect, we're born to choose. Between right and wrong, between deceit and truth, Mark chose wrong, but at least in the end, he chose to look back. And that single moment of reckoning, however late, was enough to save what was left of his soul. I still keep his last letter, the paper trembling, the ink smudged, the handwriting uneven. Every time I read it, I don't feel anger, only a quiet sorrow. Regret is not punishment, it's how the soul cleanses itself. Sometimes I think Helen had something to do with that letter finding me. She always believed every soul deserves a second chance, as long as it truly seeks to change. Sarah and I turned this house into a small community center, the Miller Foundation. Each week, people come, the elderly, workers, families who've lost their homes. They learn how to manage their finances, how to read contracts, how to protect what they own, but most importantly, how to trust their own instincts. In the living room stands the same old wooden table Helen and I built decades ago. On it sits a photo of the three of us, me, Helen, and Sarah, taken one Christmas Eve. Warm lights, soft smiles, a kind of happiness we didn't know was fleeting. Whenever visitors stop by, I tell them, justice doesn't live in the courtroom. It lives in the choices we make every day, when we choose what's right, even when it hurts. Sarah's heard that line so many times she could recite it by heart, but each time I say it, she still smiles, reaches for my hand, and whispers softly, "I know, Dad." At night, when the house glows in the amber light of the lamps, I turn on the old radio. Silent Night plays, the same song that once broke my heart, now soothing it instead. I sit by the window, looking out at the quiet street bathed in sunset, and I whisper to Helen, "It's over now, love." But endings don't mean loss. They simply turn into another kind of peace, the kind that only comes after you've lost enough to know what truly matters. And perhaps that hard-earned peace, is the greatest gift that justice and life itself ever gave me. 2 years later, the Miller Foundation was no longer just a small house on Maple Street. It had grown across Ohio, with branches in Cleveland, Dayton, and Cincinnati. I, an old man with silver hair and a slow step, was now invited to speak everywhere, from senior law seminars to community education programs. Sarah was always by my side, confident, composed, no longer the trembling woman who once hid in someone else's shadow. They call me the man who tells the truth, but I don't think of myself as special, only responsible. My job is to remind people of the simple things that can save a lifetime. I always begin with the same line. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a saint. I'm just a father who once lost everything because he trusted the wrong person, and found it all again because he refused to stop believing in what's right. Every time I say that, the room falls silent. I see elderly heads nodding quietly. I see young people wiping away tears. Not because they pity me, but because they see themselves in my story, in the moments they stayed silent when they should have spoken up, or when they chose comfort over conscience. Sarah is now the Foundation's executive director, stronger than I ever imagined. I'll never forget the first time she spoke at a conference, standing before hundreds of people. I used to believe that money was the measure of love, that the person who could give me financial stability was the one I could trust. But I was wrong. The right person is the one who lets you sleep in peace, not the one who makes you afraid of their smile. Her speech went viral. People called her the daughter who returned home. One October afternoon, as I was sorting papers in my study, Sarah walked in holding a brown envelope. "Dad," she said softly, "this came from the Federal Correctional Office in Dayton." I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of sketch paper, a hand-drawn picture, rough but meticulous. It was our house on Maple Street, the maple trees, the wooden porch, the small sign that read "The House of Truth," and beneath it 4 simple words, "For George with peace, Mark." I sat still for a long time. The pen slipped from my hand. The drawing wasn't perfect, but it was precise, down to the tiny crack in the window frame I'd once repaired myself. He remembered. After all those years, he still remembered every brick. Sarah leaned closer, reading the note. Dad, it seems like he really did change. I nodded slowly. Maybe, I said. In his world, this is the only way he knows how to say sorry. We framed the sketch and hung it by the front door. Beneath it, I added a small inscription, drawn by a man who once was wrong, but learned how to make it right. A month later, Sarah and I were invited to speak at a university in Cleveland. After our talk, a young law student approached me and said, Mr. Miller, I plan to become a financial lawyer. But today I realized the law doesn't just protect money, it protects dignity. I smiled and took his hand. If you can remember that, I told him, you'll already be the kind of lawyer the world needs. On the drive home, the sun was setting over the highway, turning the sky gold. Sarah looked at me and whispered, Dad, I think this is your rebirth. Not because you won the case, but because you've helped others avoid the pain you once lived through. I smiled, eyes on the horizon. Maybe you're right, sweetheart. Maybe this is what true justice looks like. Christmas Eve. I sit on the porch with a mug of hot tea steaming in my hands. The night sky is scattered with stars, so still you can hear the wind slipping through the old maple branches. Inside, the house on Maple Street glows warm. Sarah's laughter and the children's voices spill from the living room, weaving into the soft strains of Silent Night playing on the radio. Everything looks familiar yet feels new, the feeling of living after everything. No bitterness, no anger, only gratitude that I'm still here, breathing, able to tell this story to someone who might need it. I once thought justice was a court verdict, a sentence handed down to the guilty. But now I know. True justice is the moment a heart learns to forgive. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means freeing yourself from the chain of pain. It took me years to learn. Hold on to hatred, and you only drag your own soul into the mud with the one who betrayed you. Helen once said, family isn't built from blood, it's built from respect and kindness. I didn't fully understand then, now I do, because even though Mark betrayed us, even though Sarah lost her way, we found each other again, in truth, in mercy, in the desire to begin anew. A week before Christmas, I was invited to speak at Hamilton Church, the very place where the showdown began years ago. I stood on the old wooden pulpit, looking out at rows of faces, some familiar, some strangers. I spoke slowly without notes, only from the heart. I once lost my home, my daughter, my dignity, but I never lost faith, because I learned this. When you lose money, you lose a piece of your life. When you lose reputation, you lose a piece of yourself. But when you lose faith in the truth, you lose everything. Choose honesty, even when honesty leaves you standing alone. Choose forgiveness, even when forgiveness makes you cry, because only love and kindness make us truly human. The hall fell silent. As I stepped down, an elderly woman took my hand and whispered, "Thank you. Because of your story, I called my son, the one who hurt me. And now I feel lighter," I smiled. Forgiveness, I told her gently, is always a gift we give ourselves. Late that night, back in the wooden house, I opened an old photograph, me, Helen, and Sarah in front of this same home, long before it was reborn. I whispered, as if to someone listening far away, "If you're hearing this story, remember, family isn't a place without mistakes. It's the place we still choose to return, even after we've been wrong, and the truth, no matter how deeply buried under lies, always finds its way back, like light through the clouds." I set the photo down and smiled. A soft wind brushed through, tilting the candle flame. In that moment, I could almost hear Helen's voice. "You did it, George. And there's one last thing I want to say to you, the one reading these lines. If my story makes you think of someone, don't wait another day. Call them. Say, 'I'm sorry.' Say, 'I forgive you.' Because some words, if unsaid today, may be too late tomorrow." Sometimes the greatest miracle doesn't live in justice, it lives in forgiveness.